Hey guys, it's Chase with csjoseph.life doing another episode for season 14. This is romantic compatibility, intimacy for ENFPs and INTJs, another pedagogue relationship. So let's get on to the whiteboard here. We have intimacy for ENFP and INTJ, season 14, episode 10. And now remember, guys, this is one of the top relationships between these types. In fact, I'm a huge fan of these relationships because, as you can see, get my mouse on the screen here. You have the perception functions matching up directly with each other, and having the perception functions match up together equals high sexual compatibility. And these types have the highest sexual compatibility amongst each other, including their golden pair: ENFPs, the INFJs, INTJs with ENTPs. But guess what? Pedagogue relationships exist in such a way to give you the opportunity to basically be like, okay, yeah, I have a pedagogue relationship, we have high sexual compatibility, but we are severely lacking in emotional compatibility. And oftentimes, people end up asking so many romantic compatibility related questions to pedagogue relationships for this reason. It's because it's like, okay, yeah, we argue a lot, but the sex is so good. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand why. It's because you have highest sexual compatibility, and it's like everything in your relationship can literally be solved by just taking it to the bedroom. Fantastic, good for you. As you should probably potentially, have a sexual escapade or interlude with your pedagogue lover every single day. Of course, I'd recommend that for any relationship anyway. But keep the fire going. You know what I'm saying? It's the wisest thing to do for your relationship, especially given all the emotional compatibility challenges. And we're going to be talking about sexual compatibility and emotional compatibility challenges, as well as strengths and weaknesses as well within this lecture. So anyway, both types are movement oriented, which is great. They're both focused on progress, not necessarily the outcome. So that way, if one other type doesn't get an outcome it's looking for, it doesn't necessarily get upset, which is good. That is a conflict reduction between these two relationships. We have initiating on the ENFP side and responding to the INTJ side, which is also good because it allows the INTJ to be in the position of responder, which most responders see themselves as like, okay, that's the position of power within the relationship, etc. Okay, yeah, sure, fair enough. I can see where that goes, how that works. But furthermore, to go beyond that, it's not necessarily like the main thing or the main focus between the two. The reality situation is that while you have initiating and responding, it really keeps things in balance because it's like you have an actual two-way street level of communication instead of a one-way street level of communication, which can be difficult for two extroverts in a relationship or two introverts in a relationship, because then there's like a potential for competition in terms of who takes the initiation versus responding role. And then sometimes the more deferential of the two in the couple, if they're like both responding or if they're both initiating, ends up doing the opposite of the interaction style often. And sometimes that can make them like feel pigeonholed, and and it could make them feel unloved or maybe disrespected in the long run. So oftentimes, if you have a double introvert, double extrovert relationship, you need to consider like, okay, hey, maybe we need to have more of a balanced communication and kind of take turns in that situation because of the latent incompatibilities that comes as a result of that interaction style. Now, the ENFP is also very informative, which is great because that fits in really well with direct. Direct are people who don't really beat around the bush, whereas indirect, informative people do beat around the bush, and it allows there to be less conflict within the context of the relationship, and that's also a huge plus to this pedagogue relationship. Now, when I talk about pedagogue relationship, what that means is a pedagogue relationship is basically when you have two types with high sexual compatibility, but they don't have very good emotional compatibility. The reason why that can actually be a good thing is because that lack of emotional compatibility can actually create within this relationship a high level of love and respect that leads to, in the face of conflict, sharpening the other person, where they actually improve the other person. We discussed this in episode 9 a lot between ENTP INTJ or INFJ relationship, but in the ENFP INTJ relationship, it's no different. It's still the same thing basically. So yeah, that's where they're at with their interaction styles. Now, their temperaments are also different. They're both abstract, which is a plus. It's always good to if you're concrete versus intuitive, there's some advantages there having both present. But there's also some advantages to both being concrete or both being, abstract. And I don't necessarily say this is necessarily a weakness or strength either way, because the benefits and the negatives in each situation kind of outweigh each other. So, or they actually kind of balance each other and cancel each other out. So it's really not an issue to comment about that. Now, there is one difference, though, and this can be an issue, is that the ENFP is affiliative and focused on doing the right thing, whereas the INTJ is pragmatic, and that can be a source of conflict, because like the ENFP could accuse the INTJ of, wow, you're making me look bad with how independent, how pragmatic you are, and you just make everybody around you uncomfortable, etc. And you're so selfish in this way, and you're not thinking about me, and you're a very thoughtless person. Which would cause the INTJ to potentially react negatively, but they are actually going to learn a lesson for a long time as a result of being accused of that by their ENFP, because they have TI critic. If you want to teach a type something, if you want to hold them accountable, you hit them in the critic, because hitting them in the critic is the best way to activate their wisdom, which causes them to change for the better. You don't really change someone so much by hitting them in the child or in the inferior, but if you really want to change somebody, you hit them in the critic. And that is the number one benefit to the pedagogue relationship, because the pedagogue relationship really emphasizes all that emotional compatibility pressure on the critic function. And because of that, it can actually cause a hyper development of the critic function, which means it allows both of these types to access a greater level of wisdom as a result of their intimacy. So they can have super high sexual intimacy, but also be on a higher path towards wisdom and continuous self-improvement. That's the whole point behind the pedagogue relationship. That's why it is so meaningful. But it is not without conflict. But don't forget that conflict is necessary. If these two types want to become the best versions of themselves, if these two types want to become diamond level versions of themselves, and that's especially important for ENFPs and INTJs to hear, because they're so TE oriented, right? The extroverted thinking approach, because hey, I got the INTJ treasure hunter, or then I have the seeker of the philosopher's stone, the ENFP, because they're a philosopher type. You have the treasure hunter, and you have the person trying to make their own philosopher's stone, their I win button for life. You put them together, they're able to actually create a higher level of wisdom as a result of having that relationship with each other, while simultaneously enjoying fantastic sexual relations. I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? But again, it's the conflict itself that's what actually breeds the wisdom. Remember, you cannot comfort somebody into wisdom, right? And it's no different from these types, because the conflict is what breeds wisdom. The conflict is part of the journey between these two. And it's like, oh yeah, and then and it just becomes this weaving situation where they're coming together, going apart, coming together, coming apart, going together, coming apart, and they have this endless weaving going on. And it's like this positive negative polarity that's constantly going, and then it ends up creating like a double helix type of relationship where they just intertwine with one another, and they're able to actually get through a lot of obstacles that most other relationships would not, actually. And the best part is, if something is really ultimately unsolvable, they just take it to the bedroom. # problem solved. We'll deal with the rest of it tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? And that is, a fantastic, thing for them, as long as that they're taking care of themselves. That self-care is super mega important. Hopefully the ENFP is not depraved and then becoming super lazy and then ends up turning into a fat slob. Thus the INTJ is not even motivated to go to the gym, because the INTJ's extroverted sensing would be effectively mirroring the ENFP. And then doing that, or if the ENFP is not having a proper sleep schedule, do you think the INTJ is going to have a proper sleep schedule? The extroverted sensing has to lock in on something. The extroverted sensing, the INTJ needs to be able to lock onto the ENFP. So the more the ENFP takes care of themselves, the more the INFP, or the more the INTJ takes care of themselves, and thus the INTJ's SI demon is not consuming them from the inside out, because the SI inferior should be aspiring. Which, guess what? That can happen in this relationship due to the high sexual compatibility. it kind of naturally works itself out. So now here's the other thing. Here's another difference. The ENFP is very interest focused. They don't really care about doing the best thing or finding the best way of doing something or the best methodologies or the best system. They care about just getting theirs. Of course, ENFPs are notorious for that more than anyone else because they have the propensity to become the used car salesman archetype, let's be honest. But ENFPs, as long as they get theirs, they're good. So they want to create win-wins. And whereas the INTJ needs to realize, the ENFP penchant or desire or need for win-wins does not mean that they're trying to do the best thing, because sometimes INFJs can be self-sacrificing, even including their ISFJ demon side that can be too self-sacrificing with their superego, especially when it goes angelic, that they could actually take the ENFP down with them. And the ENFP actually pulls them out of that situation. It's like, wow, stop binging. Wow, stop not taking care of yourself. Wow, I'm going to lose respect for you. And it's like, I don't feel good about this. And I get that you're not aware of how I feel, but I'm going to tell you how I feel. And you need to think differently about this. And it really just pulls the INTJ out of that rut, that the INTJ is in. And it's absolutely necessary because they get in that rut. They get in that self-destructive binge rut when they feel like they're not performing properly or they're suboptimal. Whereas it's the ENFP's job to give them choices to help them become even more optimal. Because the ENFP will advocate for the INTJ in the eyes of others, which is absolutely fantastic. It's one way that the INTJ can take advantage of another type's sympathy, even though they're not even aware of someone else being sympathetic. Now, both types desire empathy, and they're not really going to get much empathy from one another, which can also lead to conflict. Because then, at that point, the INTJ would be calling out the ENFP for being, uncaring, and and that could be a huge issue too. But that hits the ENFP. Wow, for some reason I just realized it said ENTP. I need to erase that real quick. It's like, what is up with that? That is supposed to be an F right there. Awesome. I'm sure someone in the audience already pointed that out, but luckily I caught it myself. Haha, this time, right? So yeah, you have one affiliate to focus on doing the right thing, and then the INTJ, they're very pragmatic. That can be a source of conflict, but ultimately is also a source of huge growth for both these types. Fair enough. And obviously the temperament of the INTJ is intellectual, and the temperament of the ENFP is an idealist, right? Although the FI child, it would seem that the INTJ is somewhat an idealist in of its own right. So there is some advantages there. While the ENFP is trying to become this ultimate academic, they can kind of have some form of intellectual discussion as a result. These two types can be best buds, especially in the bedroom, but also even from a rational standpoint where they can actually really, it's like they have two separate libraries and they're just borrowing books from one another and actually compare notes. And that note comparison is what really brings these types together from an emotional standpoint and allow them to actually reach achievements together. The ENFP is very interdependent and the INTJ is very independent, but that interdependency, the ENFP allows them to have an actual shared experience with the SE inferior of the INTJ to be able to reach achievements together and achieve things together. And being on that path, that journey of achieving together is and acquiring additional treasure and being able to actually show gratitude to one another such that gratitude can spill outside of their relationship onto fellow human beings. It's absolutely meaningful and absolutely necessary. This relationship is necessary for the human race, quite frankly, as much as any of the relationships are, the gold and silver and bronze pairs, but the pedagogue relationship is also insanely important as well. And that's why I maintain it should definitely be a consideration for people when they're getting into intimate relationships with each other. Absolutely, bar none. So yeah, those are the basic traits of the INTJ. Otherwise, if you're watching this season, chances are you've already seen the other lectures, so I'm not going to go very much more into that. So let's talk a little bit more about sexual compatibility. So sexual compatibility is pretty important because you can't communicate. You can't ever communicate sexual compatibility. Let's be honest. You can't communicate that. So typically when I'm coaching people and talking about masculine feminine relationships, I'm like, okay, hey, just understand, as long as you got really good sexual compatibility, you should be fine. You can at least communicate your way through emotional issues. It's pretty simple, and you can be patient as long as you have that latent sexual compatibility. But for those out there who have emotional compatibility but don't have sexual compatibility or have neither, I actually almost always recommend that they just break up and move on, because quite frankly, there's always going to be that thing that's missing. And then if they try to make it work and try to stay together, it's like, trying to put two positive charged magnets together that just repulse, and just repulsive, right? Because remember, from a sexual compatibility standpoint, how does it actually work? Extroverted sensing is trying to consume or give experiences to introverted sensing. You know what I'm saying? That's just how it works. Or extroverted intuition is trying to give choices and desires or to feel wanted by introverted intuition, right? And because of that, you want to have an NI user, an NISE user in a relationship, and you want to have an NESI user in a relationship, basically. And these relationships, that's where the sexual compatibility comes from. And that is just natural. It's instinctual, right? It's a part of the makeup. But if you don't have that, that basic human instinct from a sexual standpoint available within your sexual relationship, then why even bother? It will sabotage you. I don't care how much endurance you have. Over time, it will start rotting your relationship from the inside out. Now, I know there's plenty of people out there who somehow make it work, and because they're fantastic human beings and super mega mature and they can get it, but at the end of the day, you're still two people walking up a huge hill trying to meet each other at the top. If you have, super high sexual compatibility, it's downhill. It's nice and easy. It's really easy, and you can come together that way, and that's just kind of how it should be, because you either have to go up a hill or you're going straight across, or you're going downhill, and it's super easy. You know what I'm saying? So, just keep that in mind. The importance of sexual compatibility in relationships is integral. Emotional compatibility is similar to sexual compatibility. The difference is that it's it's extroverted thinking trying to consume introverted thinking, and then extroverted feeling trying to consume introverted feeling. And that's where an FE user is very caring to the needs of the FI user, and the FI user rewards the FE user with gratitude and appreciation and recognition for what they do. The TE user provides input to a TI thinker, and then that rewards the TE user with honesty. It also rewards the TE user with thoughtfulness, which is another big thing, and it also keeps the TI user sharp. But when you're in a situation in a pedagogue relationship, there is no such emotional compatibility. And this creates a lot of confusion. If you notice on this whiteboard, there's little red lines here, which basically are, here's what function is trying to consume which function. And by the way, if you need a reference point and you're new seeing this, then what I recommend is that you watch a Season 5 playlist on the YouTube channel. It talks about cognitive synchronicity. And also watch Season 12, where you can kind of see cognitive synchronicity in action, where we're talking about social compatibility versus this is romantic compatibility, so it's a little bit different. But just understand, your cognitive functions are trying to find the others, and the longer distance they have to travel, the harder it's going to be. If you look at the mouse here, this introverted intuition right here is going after this NI, and it's just directly across hero to hero. But this introverted feeling, in order for the extroverted feeling to get to this introverted feeling, it's like FE Trickster is trying to travel such a long, effort-filled distance to get to the introverted feeling of the ENFP. That way, the ENFP's FI parent can walk around being like, wow, he's not really caring towards me right now, or she's not really caring towards me. Or the INTJ's TE parent can be like, wow, the ENFP obviously doesn't have a high opinion of me. They don't think highly of me. I must be doing a bad job. And what this causes is it causes hurt feelings. It causes miscommunications, which lead to hurt feelings. And that can actually create bitterness. It can create bitterness in both of these types, which can be a serious, serious problem. Even though their game in the sack is amazing and just getting better and better and better as every day goes on, well, guess what? Emotionally speaking, it's, they still feel bad about themselves because they're not getting that natural their emotional needs met by the other person within the context of the relationship. This is a big issue. And then what this ends up creating is competition, especially with how competitive the INTJ is, because the INTJ starts seeing that the ENFP must be putting the ENFP's own status above the INTJ status. So instead of trying to have a shared status, they end up competing for status. And then what you end up seeing is like a TE loop of status competition, which is what you see in that Bradley Cooper Lady Gaga film, A Star is Born. Go watch that movie if you're considering getting into a TE-TE relationship, because that's two TE users getting popularity. TE users love being popular. It's just how they are. But the thing is that a TE user, especially an INTJ, feels left out when they look at the ENFP being super popular with people, and it's like, well, what am I? Just some freaking wallflower? Like, apparently, and then the INTJ feels objectified. Even though the INTJ as a wayfarer, oftentimes, especially immature ones, can be objectifying. They objectify others. But then all of a sudden they feel like they're the ones being objectified in that situation. And I think that's unfair, right? So what do you do in that situation? What's the limit? What's the issue at that, as a result? Well, you have to realize that, as we've discussed, even with ENTP INFJ relationships, ENFP INTJ relationship is more like, okay, there needs to be a switch of roles. And this role switch is absolutely integral. You're not going to be able to, this relationship is not going to be sustainable until you actually learn how to communicate the actual emotional issues that are literally created within this status loop. And that's what it is. It's a status loop. It's about a TE loop where extroverted thinking, and it's like, okay, well, you're obviously caring more about your status than mine. What about me? I feel left out. And then that just turns into a competition, and they're just competing for status all the time. And then it turns into hurt feelings, and then it turns into bitterness and accusations, and then it turns into betrayal or perceived betrayal and indignance. Indignance means reacting negatively to a situation after perceived unfair treatment. The unfair treatment may not actually be happening, but it is perceived, right? So what do you do in that situation? How do you combat? How do you combat that? How do you make your relationship meaningful? How do you communicate your way through a status loop? Well, there is a way. There is definitely a way. But let's go a little bit further. Like, what ends up happening is that over time, each of these two types are trying to extract. They end up trying, once the status loop happens, they're competing with status. How it gets even worse is that that's what's happening in the ego. But if you look in the shadow gets worse, and they're both trying to force the other person with their FITE cognitive axes to force the other person to be empathetic towards them, because they don't want the other person's sympathy. In fact, sympathy, especially to the INTJ, makes them feel worthless, makes them feel horrible, makes them feel ineffective, suboptimal. It makes them feel inferior. Don't offer sympathy to an INTJ, because if you want to activate their insecurity and their inferiority complex and make their SE inferiority get crushed, you give an INTJ sympathy, because it's like, I don't need your sympathy. It's like as if you think I'm not capable. Don't give me sympathy, because that's offensive. It's offensive to an INTJ. But the ENFP is like, but that's what I do. It's part of my ego. Wrong. And then comes, the conflict resolution. How do you communicate your way out of this? How do you deal with this emotional issue, this lack of compatibility emotionally, right? Here's how you deal with it. There's two ways to deal with the conflict resolution. One, and it's the obvious one, have sex. Go have sex immediately. Even during the fight, just start having sex. It would be good. Because, and I know that sounds a little weird, but when you're getting really mad at someone, you hear people get the advice of, well, just start taking off your clothes as you're yelling at one another. It will change things. It kind of does. It kind of really does. If you're kind of getting mad at your spouse and whatnot, or your partner, and they're getting mad at you, but then you're like, okay, well, maybe we need to take this to the bedroom. Just start disrobing. It sounds weird. It kind of works, because you're kind of showing humility in the process because it's kind of hard to yell at each other when you're naked. Let's be honest. It kind of is, and especially if you're disrobing because you're showing an act of humility. Because it's kind of like you're falling on your sword, And it's like, okay, you're showing vulnerability. You're exposing yourself to me. Maybe I shouldn't be as mad, right? And that's kind of on the ENFP to do because, one, they're the initiator, and also they have the burden of showing loyalty to the INTJ. So it kind of has to start with the ENFP in that process. Even if the ENFP didn't start it, the ENFP kind of needs to rise to the occasion. But at the same time, the INTJ needs to be making the ENFP comfortable to do so. So step one for conflict resolution is take it to the bedroom. Because it just absolutely needs to be that way. The ENFP goes up to the INTJ and is like, hey, no one makes me more comfortable than you do, so just, take me to the bedroom and let me have it like you never have before or something like that. Or the INTJ's got to be like, I really want you right now. You just go for it and make the ENFP feel wanted, and it helps them open themselves up to the INTJ. Definitely go for it. So that's conflict resolution step one. Step two is a lot more deeper and more in tune with the emotional compatibility than the sexual compatibility. So on the emotional compatibility side, how do you communicate your way or get your way out of this conflict when you're dealing with the status loop and both of you are trying to force extract empathy from the other person, force extraction of it? Well, you have to take it to the critic functions. So look at it this way. The role of TIFE user, the role of TI user basically has to go to the INTJ because it has TI critic. Because the INTJ has the highest amount of TI available, functionally speaking, within the relationship because it's a critic. Therefore, the burden of verifying everything actually is on the INTJ. It is the INTJ's job to verify everything. It is the INTJ's job to receive and listen to input from the ENFP. And even if the INTJ disagrees with the input, still has to listen and still has to do the work of verifying what the ENFP is actually telling the INTJ. It's that simple. But it's not the INTJ's job to make the ENFP feel good all the time. It's not. That's actually the job. The job of FE user actually goes to the ENFP because the ENFP has the highest amount of FE, the highest amount of extroverted feeling and that, that caring, that ethics for the relationship in the relationship. So it's actually on the ENFP to develop their extroverted feeling and show and be more caring and more potentially to the point of showing more, through servitude, acts of service towards the INTJ. Actually. That's absolutely critical for the sake of the relationship. Absolutely critical. So when you consider that, you start to realize some things. Because oftentimes the ENFP is like, I need you to make me, feel good to the INTJ. Nope, not the INTJ's job. It's actually the ENFP's job to make the INTJ feel good, right? And to feel better about themselves. Because guess what? The ENFP has the highest amount of FE in the relationship, so it's on the ENFP to actually be the extroverted feeler at that standpoint. But whereas it's the INTJ's job to be thoughtful towards the ENFP. So it's a trade, folks. Do you guys see it? It's just that it's kind of like you're reversing your emotional roles in the relationship. And if you just focus on doing that, you'll be good. All the other, we're talking about 8 rules for love in season 27. The 8 rules for love for ENFPs and INTJs, sure, they all apply. The thing is, though, is that it's the ENFP's job to go out of their way to make the INTJ feel better about themselves. It's the ENFP's job to not harm the status of the INTJ. It's the ENFP's job to actually raise up and venerate and cause the INTJ status to increase more so than their own. It's their FI parents' responsibility to put the INTJ status above their own, which is super hard for TE child, but guess what? It's the requirement. Conversely, it is the INTJ's job. look at it this way. It's the INTJ's job to, be thoughtful and actually verify everything the ENFP is potentially doing, etc. And then as a result of that verification, realize that the status of the ENFP is increasing. It's a shared status. Remember, you're both trying to achieve together. It's kind of like a shoulder-to-shoulder approach. We're going to achieve these great things together. We're going to have that shared status where it's our status. It's not your status. It's not my status. It's our status, right? And when it comes to like moral principles and whatnot, it's the principles of the INTJ that needs to be supported. It's the status of the ENFP that needs to be stored with their child functions, for example. And it's necessary, but as long as the FE critic of the ENFP, as long as the ENFP takes on the role of the FE user of the relationship and is not harming the feelings of the INTJ, raising their own status at the expense of the INTJ, which is very, very important, then that's great. The same thing goes with the INTJ, is that when the INTJ is not raising their moral awareness, and they're also not raising their intelligence at the expense of the ENFP, right? So think about that. Think about how that basically means, hey, I'm responsible for verifying everything, but that responsibility is not on the ENFP. That's for the INTJ. It's the responsibility to show recognition and appreciation. The INTJ has to show recognition and appreciation to the ENFP as a result. The other side of the coin, right? So just understand that status loop can be a serious problem. The INTJ can expect empathy from the ENFP. The ENFP can expect thoughtfulness from the INTJ. That's just what has to happen, folks. It's because the critic function is there. And this is why pedagogue relationships exist, because they exist to build critic functions. They exist to build wisdom in the other person. That's why it's known as pedagogue. Pedagogue equals teacher. They are each other's teachers, who just happen to be two teachers that teach each other, who happen to have a sexual relationship, right? And they learn from one another. And then as a result of that, they end up becoming on a path of shared status, a path of continuous improvement. Every pedagogue relationship is literally Kaizen. Kaizen means continuous improvement, forever. It's not about being perfect. It's not about arriving. It's about being on the journey of gaining achievements, plural, not a journey of getting one achievement. It's about being on a constant ladder of forward progressive growth. That's the point, folks. That's how these two relationships benefit each other. Oh, and by the way, they're having absolutely great sex the entire time. The ENFP goes to the INTJ, is like, give it to me. And the INTJ is like, oh, yes, I will. You know what I'm saying? ENFPs definitely love to be worked over by extroverted sensors. And extroverted sensors love to paint upon that canvas. They absolutely love it. So the ENFP needs to get to a point where they're absolutely comfortable with the INTJ. Here's another issue that could be an issue, especially from a sexuality standpoint. ENFPs, they're affiliative. And for some reason, they get in their heads, they have these wrong beliefs about how sex is supposed to be a certain way, which actually inhibits the freedom of choice of the INTJ because they're independent and they're pragmatic. So because they're pragmatic, they feel like the ENFP is just not comfortable with certain sexual acts that the INTJ would like to put upon the canvas and paint on the canvas of the ENFP. And they feel like they're being limited by the ENFP. Wrong. That's a sign of disloyalty on the part of the ENFP. The ENFP needs to demonstrate loyalty to their INTJ lover by giving the INTJ full freedom to do whatever they desire to them. The INTJ full freedom to do whatever they desire to the ENFP in a bedroom sexual situation. Because the ENFP needs to demonstrate loyalty. But it's the responsibility of the INTJ to make sure that the ENFP is comfortable enough to get to that point. But the ENFP needs to make sure they're not allowing the affiliative do the right thing, social pressure of how sex should go get in the way of their sex acts, because it's just going to lead to, not effective sex. I actually coached an ENFP INFJ couple recently, and I told them the same thing. Stop allowing the affiliative to determine how you guys have sex. It's inappropriate. Especially since the INFJ is trying to aspire with their ESTP subconscious. How about you be loyal to your INFJ and let them do whatever they want to you in the bedroom and stop being uncomfortable and have faith and put your faith into your INFJ. It's no different here with ENFPs and INTJs. It is the responsibility of the ENFP to put their faith into the INTJ. The INTJ is not going to do anything wrong. The INTJ is already afraid of doing it wrong and afraid of performing badly. So what business do you have being afraid, ENFPs? You have no business. So stop doing it. You have to be able to give them full choice to do whatever they want to. You need to get to a point where you're that comfortable with them. INTJs, you need to study and learn. Don't watch pornography. That's not what I'm talking about. Read Art of Seduction. Do something like meaningful, not expedient. Let's be honest, guys. Kama Sutra, or one of my personal favorites, the periodic table of sex positions. That's fantastic. Why don't you get that and literally post it in your bedroom? It's kind of badass if you think about it. Like seriously. But the point is, you guys understand, So obviously that's there. But when it comes to emotional issues, the INTJ needs to verify. And guess what? The ENFPs, you have to listen to the INFJ and you have to allow them to verify your beliefs. Because if you don't, you're going to start believing anything. And you're going to look irresponsible. And then the INTJ is going to not want to be around you when you do that. It makes you unwanted. You want to be unwanted by an INTJ? Then don't listen to them. Ooh. They need to listen to you. You need to give them the room to criticize you. You need to give them the room to verify your beliefs. In as much INTJs, you need to give ENFPs the room to care for you and be sympathetic towards you and stop giving into your stupid pride of, if someone shows me sympathy, that automatically means I'm incapable. And I know I'm a perfectionist, but I don't need your sympathy. Actually, INTJs, you do. Shut up. Grow up. Let your ENFP care for you and stop being prideful about it. Your FI child is so annoying sometimes. And you're only hurting your ENFP lover. They're loyal to you after all. Let them. Let them actually care for you. Doesn't make you a bad person. Actually, it makes you a better person. They already are so sympathetic towards you. Let their FI parent do that. I get that, you have your own moral principles, but guess what? They're more responsible with moral principles than you are. Okay? Just like you're more responsible with thinking than they are. That's why you have the burden of thinker and they have the burden of carer in the relationship. Okay? And then they have the burden of principles and you have the burden of status in terms of responsibility. But then for your inner child, you need to be venerating the ENFP status, but not your own expense. And the ENFP needs to be venerating your morality, but not at the expense of their morality. Everything has to be talked about consistently. But when it comes to verification and truth, that's the INTJ's responsibility. When it comes to caring and serving and giving and, being empathetic, that's the ENFP's responsibility, And showing appreciation and loyalty, demonstrations of loyalty, ENFP responsibility. Making the ENFP as comfortable as possible and going out of your way to perform properly at all times, that's the INTJ's responsibility. So you guys need to learn how to take responsibility for your own needs, but also the needs of each other, because that's what a sexual relationship is all about. That's what an intimate relationship is all about. How can you guys consistently be in a relationship if you will not even do that? If you will not even commit to each other in that way? Okay? Besides, if you're getting married, it's funny actually. I was talking to a couple recently, and the guy in the relationship was like, "Oh, I don't want to get married till I'm 28," and I'm like, "All right, So you have highest sexual compatibility. You're in an amazing relationship. You've been together for over a year and a half, and you don't want to wait to get married until you're 28, which is many years later, okay? Wow. And I'm like, okay, Mr. INJ, you have some serious commitment issues. This is exactly how you're making your little ENFP feel, because your ENFP is like, wow, why am I even loyal to him? Wow, I guess I'm not wanted. I guess I'm not special. Wow. See, ENFPs, you gotta tell them how the INTJ that you're not comfortable with the lack of their commitment when you are committed to them. It's the responsibility of extroverted sensing to be mirroring your commitment, because extroverted sensors are only as loyal as you are to them. But if you know you're loyal and you can show achievements that prove loyalty on your part, the INTJ has to listen to that, and they better capitulate if there's a lack of commitment on the INTJ's part. Because then it's okay, you just tell the INTJ, then why am I committed to you then? Challenge them. Provide that challenge. ENFPs are a feminine type anyway. The feminine exists to challenge the masculine, right? So then it's on the ENFP to challenge and bring challenge to the INTJ. And the INTJ is just going to have to get over it, regardless of which gender they are. Because it's still the INTJ's job to verify everything from the truth. It's almost as if the INTJ is become an INFJ in the relationship. It's almost as if the ENFP has become an ENTP in a relationship. Okay? The burden of support is on the ENFP. The burden of truth is on the INTJ. Communicate. The burden of communications is on both in order for you to satisfy your emotional needs. But guess what? Your critic functions will be grown super quick, and you'll be the wisest couple out of anyone that you know. And that wisdom will help you reach all of your health, wealth, and relationship goals in your life. I promise you. The Pedagogue relationship is one of the most powerful relationships of them all. You just have to get over your own selfishness, damn it. It's not that hard. Stop competing for status. In fact, start sharing your status. Start working to increase your status together. It's not about, their status. It's about our status. Such is the way of the ENFP INTJ relationship. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, or enlightening, then great. Please leave a comment on Patreon. That would be dope. Otherwise, thank you all, and glad to do another Season 14 for you folks, and thank you for voting on the quiz. It was fun, and I hope you guys have found this lecture useful to help you guys with your relationships. Otherwise, really happy and very thankful. But anyway, big thanks and for everything that you guys do, and I look forward to the next lecture, which will be Season 19 for you folks. So anyway, you folks have a good night, and I'll see you guys on the Season 19 episode.